Okay, we're back, and we are joined now by Dr. Peter Marks, the nation's former top vaccine regulator, a guy who played a key role in Operation Warp Speed that produced a COVID vaccine in, 11 months? And a veteran scientist who had been with the FDA since 2012. Dr. Marks, welcome to Why Should I Trust You?
Thanks so much for having me today.
The first question we have for you is do you happen to be related to the singer Richard Marks?
No,
Yeah.
I'm not. Sorry.
Interview's
All right.
over.
Well, no,
Okay.
I think we still
I think
talk
we
to you
got the
though.
wrong guy, guys. I think
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
thought we were
Whoops.
going to get Richard Marks's brother, and this is just not happening. Look, Dr. Marks, we want to start in a slightly different place than maybe you're used to in some of the interviews you've been doing. I don't think we're exaggerating when we say you are a person who has devoted your life to science, to the scientific method, to using science to improve lives. The first question we want to ask you, first of all, is from folks that we've been talking to who are a little bit skeptical of science, of public health, who have a lot of questions and concerns about vaccines. And one of the questions we've gotten from several people is just about whether or not vaccines have undergone sufficient safety testing. I think, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., has made the case over his career and even recently that hasn't been the case. So how can you assure parents that most vaccines have undergone sufficient safety testing?
Right. So the vaccine approval process in the United States is a very rigorous run. And let's just back it up. There are a lot of vaccine candidates that come forward, some of which are found to not be good enough to make it through the process. There's used to be a commercial, sorry, Charlie, not all tuna can be star-kissed.
Hmm.
Um, Not every vaccine that comes forward is going to make it through the process, right? And by definition, what makes it through the process are vaccines that have demonstrated their safety, generally now in large randomized controlled trials with months and months of safety follow-up. And those eventually get submitted to the FDA. A staff of scientists, physicians, and other professionals review the information on those vaccines. That vaccine that's submitted, they inspect facilities to make sure they're being made with high quality. They look at the data. They make sure that everything there supports that the actual vaccine has the safety and effectiveness that it's purported to have. And then ultimately, oftentimes it comes to a public advisory committee that the advisors that are essentially vetted for conflict of interest will discuss it. And if they agree, they will make a recommendation that the FDA approve a vaccine, and then FDA takes the action. But that's not where it ends, because contrary to what some people say, FDA doesn't just put a vaccine out there and leave it on its own. FDA actually then spends time making sure that uh, by looking at post-market surveillance, along with colleagues at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that the vaccine remains safe over time. And if a safety signal comes up, which sometimes happens after you expose millions of people to it, we look to make sure that it is not one that would preclude the further use of that vaccine. So there is a lot that's done in the way of safety.
But Dr. Marks, can you assure people that you can do that at regular speed and at warp speed?
It can be done at regular speed and at warp speed. And actually, the real key at warp speed was making sure that we were doing everything and crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's that we did at regular speed at warp speed. Now, anyone who knows about, travel, if you're going to dematerialize one place and rematerialize someplace else, it has to be done with tremendous precision because you don't want your nose where your foot is. So you got to be careful about it. And all kidding aside, we were very careful about it. And there a tremendous amount of thought was put into for instance, the COVID vaccines, into how much do we actually really need for safety follow-up to feel very confident that deploying these vaccines are going to be safe in a large population. A tremendous amount of discussion around that. And we ended up settling on, for instance, 2 months median safety follow-up for the COVID vaccines. That's less than our normal 6 months or a year for other vaccines. But in the setting of a pandemic where people were dying in front of our eyes, we felt that 99% of the serious adverse events would become apparent then, and we could make the leap. So a lot of thought goes into this. And sometimes that people who are vaccine hesitant or have questions about vaccines don't realize is that all of us at FDA who are involved with vaccines, we look at vaccines with the eye that our family members are going to be taking them, right? I mean, I take all the different vaccines, including I took any number of COVID-19 vaccines. And so we would never want to see something come forward that is less than as safe as it possibly could be. And I think it just is a great example. Not every COVID vaccine made it through the process. Um, there was a vaccine by AstraZeneca, which was studied in a large number of people, and it turned out to have side effects that we considered significant enough compared to the other vaccines that were in development that we just said, nah, you know, there's going to be issues here. And it did not progress the same way. Now, that vaccine was made available in other parts of the world. It ultimately was associated with a higher risk of certain side effects that are very serious. And we didn't have those here. We did have some issues with one of the vaccines that were very serious, the Janssen vaccine, and we took care of those. So we monitor the safety very carefully. Now, that said, I totally understand how people can be somewhat fearful of vaccines because, it's the syringe, it's got this liquid in it, they're putting it into your body. That's something that a lot of us aren't used to having people ask us to do. But that leap of faith in science is what has protected us, um, over the years. And when you think about it, there's a long chain of how vaccination has protected us that dates back 2 centuries, right? I mean,
Right. But
I this was in the late 18th century it started, but by the early 20th century, it was becoming very clear how important vaccination was. And look at what vaccines brought us. Most people don't understand what a miracle it is.
so Dr. Marks, you've given a very earnest answer. I think half our audience is nodding and snapping or applauding, and the other half is like, uh-uh, no way. No way. This is the machine talking now. Like I'm dialing out. I don't buy it. Like what and that not buying it anymore. We could probably argue that it helped Trump win. It put RFK in the position he's in. It's provided the fuel to slash the HHS, to cut funding to research around the country, potentially led to your departure from your job. Like what what is going on here with vaccines? And can you take a step back and try and diagnose the problem? Like why has America or a big swath of Americans suddenly said, I don't trust these things that you were just about to make the argument like was transformational in the 20th century, which is a fact, but
Well,
not
that's
anymore.
because they haven't. We live in a culture now where we watch TikToks, etc., and we haven't seen with our own eyes what vaccines could do. I am sure somebody has a grandparent somewhere, or maybe even a great grandparent, that had to deal with polio in their neighborhood, right? Where they knew somebody that was paralyzed from polio. And they may have seen what happened with the advent of Salk's polio vaccine. By the way, talk about a large randomized trial. That field trial of the polio vaccine, Dr. Salk's polio vaccine, involved 620,000 children.
Hmm.
So wasn't small by any means. But aside from that, these vaccines took things like smallpox, which used to kill in the it killed several percent of the population. And it's no longer present on this earth except in high containment laboratories. Okay. Polio, which I know some people argue, well, it's just better sanitation and that's why we don't have it anymore. But that's not why we got rid of polio. The introduction of the vaccine and the curve of polio are too close together. It was the polio vaccination. And we know that when you don't vaccinate kids against polio, as we're seeing now in places in Asia, you get polio back again and you get paralytic polio. So we haven't witnessed with our own eyes the magic and the miracle of vaccines. So we have to rely on trust. And if there's anything we've lost today, it's trust. And it's
So,
hard to trust in science sometimes.
yeah. Dr. Marks, let me follow up on that because look, I hear you and full disclosure, I'm vaccinated, I've gotten my kids vaccinated, all that. But some of the folks we talk to, I think they view what you just said as like they may even find it a bit condescending to say that it's like TikTok and misinformation that's leading them down this road. For them, they see, I'll just give you a couple of examples, right? For them, they don't understand why we have so many like such a hefty childhood vaccination schedule, something like 25 by the time you're like what, one, or that's one reason. Then they saw that there was what they perceived to be a suppression of the adverse event of myocarditis during COVID. I want to help me understand where you think some of these questions really make a lot of sense and where like do you think once you dig really deep, Dr. Marks, that like there were things that your community could have done better during COVID to assuage some of these concerns?
Okay, well, let's start with an easy one. Myocarditis during COVID, that safety signal was identified and the product was labeled and people learned about it within 6 to 8 weeks. Now, that's not just me saying that. The federal record and the records that are being turned over to Congress right now support that. Okay. That was figuring out a safety signal that's as complicated as that and getting it on the label in 6 to 8 weeks. That was not suppression. That was actually doing our jobs. Unfortunately, some would turn this around and say, well, it was suppression. But let's also just also be realistic here. Um, that issue of myocarditis, we've learned how to deal with now. It's not a big issue now for the COVID vaccines. And even back then, when it was an issue, it was a mild complication, not associated with death, most of the time associated with a hospitalization and complete recovery in a disease that was associated with um, with significant morbidity and death. And actually, what science does is we do something called a risk-benefit analysis and figure out how many kids did you actually have to give the vaccine to be reasonable for these adverse events. And at the end of the day, the risk-benefit, even in adolescent boys, where probably the rates of myocarditis were the highest, was still favorable. But it has been misused and unfortunately it's cited. Now,
What do you say to the people who say, I just don't want to be in that first group in the 6 to 8 weeks? Could you please just figure it out before I'm gonna sign my
yeah.
child up for that?
Well, that's why in general we study vaccines. With the exception of a public health emergency, we're generally studying these vaccines in studies that go on for 6 to 12 months. In the average vaccine trial involves somewhere between 15 to 20,000 children who are given the vaccine and 15 to 20,000 who are given a placebo. Now, in some cases, it's just salt water that they're given. In other cases, they're given an irrelevant vaccine that if you're looking to, for instance, to protect against measles, you might give them a diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine because you're actually doing benefit by public health. To show that you can still prevent, you're because you're looking for the prevention of measles and you're vaccinating these kids anyway. So these are large randomized controlled trials that get very decent answers about the safety signal. Even there, We do post-market surveillance because we want to make sure that even in the 15 or 20,000 who've received the vaccine, there's not something that shows up when you've given it to 15 or 20 or 30 million children. So safety is top of mind here. Um, but let's just step back. At least let's step back. I hear you also on the lots of different vaccines. But remember that what vaccination is doing, let's just think about what vaccination does. Vaccination mimics what is happening every day to us in the world, and it does so against potentially lethal pathogens, that's lethal bacteria, viruses, fungi, without having us have to be exposed to the risk of death from the pathogen, or the much higher risk of death from the pathogen. It does it safely. And by definition, it has to do it extremely safely because these are being given to healthy people. And so um, when we do this, right, we take something that is either a piece of the pathogen, which is a protein from it or a sugar from it, and that we can make an antibody to without getting exposed to the actual bug. Um, or sometimes we take, as in the measles vaccine, we develop a virus that gives us immunity that's very good, but that does not cause the infection that can potentially be life-threatening.
Yeah.
And I just use the measles vaccine as one of the most successful vaccines we have. I mean, it is, to me, un it's just not fathomable given the amount of evidence we have for measles vaccine. We could argue, maybe we can start to argue about certain other vaccines, but most of the childhood vaccines, pretty hard to argue why you wouldn't want to get your child measles vaccinated, because measles very reproducibly kills
Yeah.
1 in 1,000 healthy children. And I want to make sure that we get to this. It is incorrect. It is absolutely incorrect on the public health test, Public Test Health 101, to say that measles only kills like children that are debilitated or that are malnourished or this. That's not the case. It kills 1 in 1,000 healthy children. It might kill more if, like, as in American Samoa, where it killed about 1 in 500, 1 in 750, when you have more other problems in the background like malnutrition or other health conditions. But 1 in 1,000 healthy children. Why would you put your child at risk of something that has a 1 in 1,000 chance of killing them when you have a vaccine that does not kill anyone? That's anyone who's telling you that measles vaccine kills kids. It doesn't. Okay. Maybe because I'm a scientist, I'm always going to say, is there a possibility that once it's happened? Yes, I mean, it's possible. In American Samoa, when it happened, it was because someone gave kids the wrong vaccine, and with the wrong diluent. Um, so it's not from the measles vaccine per se.
Yeah.
Um,
We're going to get into measles definitely in a bit, but you're raising a point that I think that it is giving people a lot of hesitancy, and it is that safety question. And you said risk benefit. Is it worth the risk? Is it, beneficial? I want to turn to something that people use to kind of inform those decisions. A system called VAERS that obviously a lot about. But for our audience, it's the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It's a national surveillance tool in place since 1990. It's run by the CDC, the FDA, and it's basically out there to say, hey, I'm a database. If you have a problem, give it to me so I know where to look. So it collects side effects and it helps, detect safety signals, and it might warrant further investigation. It's a passive system, meaning Brenda could submit, Tom could submit, anybody could submit, their doctor could submit. And it's just say, hey, I'm raising my hand, please take a look at this. It's then, people like you on the inside then open that database and say, hey, is there a pattern here? Is there a signal that's rising up? So it's a great tool to, speak to the people, if you will. But in an interview with the Associated Press, this has become a flashpoint, it seems. You said that you refused to grant RFK's team unrestricted access to a vaccine safety database, assuming it's this one, because you were worried that they would delete it or manipulate it. What's going on here?
so I think what we ultimately gave them read access to that database, and they were satisfied with that. the issue here is that I'm the first to acknowledge that theirs is not a perfect way to show the public how we're doing safety reporting. It's hard to see what's behind VAERS. The public sees behind when they look at the VAERS website is all these incoming adverse events, the large majority of which are actually not vaccine related. But that's okay. We just want to try to find signals. And so we're very happy that people report, but they don't see the work that goes behind sorting it out. Now, theirs is only one of several overlapping safety systems. It is the passive one, as you said, but we have a number of active safety surveillance systems where we go out and look for things in very large databases. The Sentinel Best system from FDA is a great example of one that can have tens of millions of lives and look at claims-based databases and electronic health records to see if people who got a vaccine have an increased incidence of a specific adverse event versus another. But just getting back to VAERS for a moment, a lot of the issue with VAERS for the public has to do, and I think a lot of the confusion and a lot of the conspiracy theory that goes around it is they see what goes in, but they don't see how we do the work to sort through it to come out with uh, our estimation of adverse events. And so one of the things I totally agree was a reform. It's where you try to meet them in the middle. I totally agree with the incoming administration. We could have done better, and we were in the process of working with our colleagues at CDC with trying to find a way to make more transparent how we do the math, how we take the number of adverse events that come in, sort through them, and essentially adjudicate them, and along the way, how we get to the ultimate, these adverse events seem to be associated with the vaccine or not. In a way, just the best analogy I can give you is, you can do division on a calculator, but you don't know that you actually know the concept of how you're doing division, right? On the other hand, if you do division and by longhand with subtraction of amounts each time as you go through the division problem to get the final quotient, you actually know that you understand division. So our idea was to try to show the work here. So that was just one of the things. So I think VAERS it's a great passive safety reporting system. It is effective in detecting signals. We know that because it was how the thrombotic thrombocytopenia syndrome signal was found for the Janssen vaccine during COVID, and it's been how others have been found in the past. And then we can go confirm those using the active safety surveillance systems. But unfortunately, in its current version, it makes things ripe for conspiracy theorists to say that, well, the COVID vaccines killed 30,000 people. Well, during the COVID pandemic, as part of the emergency use authorization, it was required that every serious adverse event get reported. And we gave COVID vaccines to a lot of people over 65 years of age, and particularly over 75 years of age. And if you look, people over 75 years of age, they sometimes just die of natural causes. Those got reported too. And so once you start subtracting those out, the numbers of deaths start to go away pretty quickly.
Yeah, Dr. Marks, though, why did VAERS become such a flashpoint? I mean, is that the straw that broke the camel's back? Like, why are we talking about it when there are so many other things?
I think because it was an easy target for people to point to because it was up there on a public website. The others are like the active surveillance systems, although we post protocols, it's not as easy to target them. It's not as easy for an academic to go and start manipulating things without actually knowing what's behind them. And this is actually something that we talk about in the larger. Remember, I didn't just do vaccines. I also did cell tissue gene therapies and blood products. We talk about this in the larger ecosystem of medical products that, it getting the data can be challenging, and we have to work through these kind of safety signals in a very thoughtful manner.
Is this why you left this this interaction with the RFK team about the VAERS system and what kind of access they could have to it?
Now, there were it was became increasingly apparent that there was trouble in paradise. Um, and ultimately, it was not my choice. I was given a choice, and I took one to resign. But make no mistake, I don't think they intended to keep me around if I did not resign. In fact, I know that's a fact.
Hmm. I want to pivot to RFK and this large research effort that he is coordinating at HHS into what the cause of autism is. I'm sure you followed the news just yesterday in a cabinet meeting. He announced that he expects to have an answer on that cause by September. So let's take a listen to him in the cabinet meeting yesterday, and then we'd love to just get your thoughts on the other side.
We have now, the autism rates have gone from now most recent numbers we think are going to be about 1 in 31, 1 in 12, so they're going up again from 1 in 10,000 when I was a kid. And we are going, at your direction, we are going to know by September. We've launched a massive testing and research effort that's going to involve hundreds of scientists from around the world. By September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
So big. Think of that. So it was 1 in 10,000 children had autism, and now it's 1 in 31. Not 31,000, 31. That's a horrible statistic, isn't it? And there's got to be something artificial out there that's doing this. So you think you're going to have a pretty good idea, huh?
We will know by September.
There will be no bigger news conference than that. So that's it. If you can come up with that answer where you stop taking something, you stop eating something, or maybe it's a shot, but something's causing it.
So, Dr. Marks, what do you make of that?
So I'm not going to comment directly on Mr. Kennedy's statements, but let's just talk about how science works. Unless someone has some preconceived notion right now or some large basis of scientific evidence that I'm completely unaware of, the concept that even with a warp speed-like effort, you're going to be able to say with that kind of certainty that we're going to have an answer in September, that's not realistic. Okay. And it is the kind of false hope that we don't believe in medicine, right? I'm a hematologist oncologist. One of the hardest things in my life to do was to provide people with hope about a next day, but not false hope about their fate. And this is, to me, false hope that you're going to have an answer for something that I don't believe there is going to be an answer to. And if there is an answer, it's not going to be the correct answer because that's just not how science works. I am not an autism expert. I'm a person who can tell you that vaccines, particularly the vaccines in the childhood schedule, don't cause autism. I'll tell you that. And I'm pretty certain of that. Autism is a very complex subject, and it probably involves issues right now with increased diagnosis, issues that may have to do that are genetic and increases and issues that could be environmental. But the complexity here is very rich and is going to require a lot of work. And generally, this kind of complexity is going to require years to sort out. And people have been working on it for years and still haven't sorted it out. We've made little headway here or there with, oh, this is a genetic predisposition or this or that. But there's a complex problem. I'm not going to give people false hope. I think this is something that's still going to take years to solve.
Peter, I really appreciate your perspective, and I completely agree. I think that the numbers that are highlighted in that clip and that RFK Jr. has said many times of going from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 31 is a reflection of our new diagnostic criteria for autism. And there's obviously a genetic component, there's obviously environmental components, as there is for every complex condition. Ultimately, we don't want to have false hope. We don't want to say that there is something that we could just change and there wouldn't be cases of autism. And if anything, viruses and bacteria can cause deficits in children. And so that's a big piece of the hope puzzle that I think is missing. And we really need to understand what's happening after acute infections, after infections during pregnancy. And I just worry that this focus and this promise of an answer in this short period of time is kind of missing the mark. And so I don't know if you have an ideal way that this could be targeted. How could we actually look at this cause in a better way?
So I want to talk about vaccines and autism for a couple minutes, if that's okay. But let me just answer your question, which is the only way to do science is to have an open mind. And so we need to have an open-minded investigation, to have investigators with a variety of different viewpoints to look at this issue and to take different approaches. Because by taking different approaches, some genetic, some environmental, some interactional with the complex, we will get to an answer. But it's going to take time, and it's going to mean funding a lot of different, dare I say, um, you know, people with different viewpoints, and that may even sometimes have diametrically opposed viewpoints, being able to do research and come up with hypotheses that can be tested on what is causing autism. But I just want to get back to this with vaccines and autism, because it's very easy to point to them. And I believe that some of the way that this happened was based on a very false report that has been absolutely repudiated by a gentleman named Wakefield more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades ago now. And that association, which then sometimes was blamed on mercury, which was contained in a preservative of vaccines, was actually turns out to have been unjustified too, because it's been shown that it wasn't the mercury in vaccines. And but for those who might be listening who are saying, "Oh my goodness, he just said mercury in vaccines," pediatric vaccines, the vaccines we give to our children today in the United States, they don't contain any mercury, nor have they contained it since the year 2000.
And
So
when
your
and when they
child,
came out in 2000, you didn't see any changes in autism levels,
well,
correct?
that's exactly right. And actually, right. So mercury, that's exactly, in fact, the CDC in about the early 2010s published a study where they looked at a cohort before mercury was taken out and after, and there was no difference. Um, But let's also talk about autism from the standpoint of a specific vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, where someone continues to point towards that as maybe a cause of autism. There is just no evidence for an association, and I would point everyone to to me, one of the cleanest studies was a Danish study that was performed in over 600,000 children, where the autism cases versus the autism cases were actually reduced slightly. It's probably not statistically significant in those who were vaccinated over those who were unvaccinated. So MMR vaccine saves lives, and it doesn't cause autism, doesn't cause encephalitis, doesn't cause death. It just saves children's lives. So I know we're going to get back to that, but this autism issue and vaccines has become a large distraction, and it has been something that has taken away. I couldn't agree with you, Maggie, more that this is opportunity cost. It's opportunity cost of actually getting at the true cause of autism because we're being distracted. Science isn't easy, and this idea that some people have that we're going to be able to do a quick experiment and find out the answer, that's just it is just not correct, especially with something as complicated as autism. Because if you look, when even we use the word autism, but I've known I've known a lot of children and adult children, adults who have been children in the past who have autism, and it's a lot of different disease. So, first of all, we have to even figure out, we're just saying something here, and we haven't even, dealt with. I'm not an expert in this area because I'm not a neurologist or a behavioral psychologist. You're dealing with something that's probably undoubtedly got more complexity than meets the eye. And to think you're going to find one quick answer to that, that's just not how we do science.
Dr. Marks, it's so interesting. I sometimes feel like the autisms and vaccine conversation is like stuck in this spin cycle. It's caught in the spin cycle where you've got, folks really concerned about autism, but also just more broadly about adverse events in vaccines. And then you've got the scientific community being like, but the science is all there. And with the risk benefit, it goes on the side of benefit. And then no, but adverse event. No, but the science is there. And I'm just wondering, like, is there an element of this to get us out of this spin cycle? Because look, I hear you. Um, there used to be a time when folks didn't mistrust science as much. But there was always the voices out there who did. But I'm just wondering, like, do you think about a different approach? And I'm not saying this to you personally, but do you ever think about whether science is approaching this the right way? Like beyond just the fact that you think that there's bad faith actors out there that are kind of putting stuff in there. Like, do we need to approach this conversation differently?
Well, it's a really good question. I think part of what's happened in science is it's gotten pretty complicated, and scientific communication has not kept up with this. Being able to have conversations with people that are able to explain that, for instance, that what vaccines do is exactly what your immune system does every day anyway, right? I mean, we get exposed to the average child eats, believe it or not, your 2-year-old is eating actually a couple hundred milligrams of dirt a day, whether you know it or not. Um, and
I
they're
totally
making,
know it. I am telling
yes,
you right now,
okay.
my children fully are like eating dirt.
Right, right. So they're making antibodies to things all the time. And that natural process is just what vaccines mimic. There's no magic here. And whether that be a protein-based vaccine or an mRNA vaccine, that are just mimicking that natural process. Our job at FDA or FDA's job, was to make sure that the vaccines that come, they don't have any untoward effects, and that they really are just mimicking that natural process to the greatest extent possible. Um, but we haven't done a really good job explaining it. But I do also have to say that some of this is our problem as scientists, and I don't mean to hurl, but some of this is as our problem as a nation, which is that once upon a time, we were willing to do things not just for ourselves, but also because they did something for our neighbor. And vaccination is the ultimate gift. It gives to you because it protects you, but it also can help protect your neighbor. When we have vaccination rates for measles, mumps, rubella, for instance, measles vaccine, when measles vaccination rates are up above 90%, moms don't have to worry about whether their maternal immunity is going to carry their child over being protected for measles 4 months or 6 months, because you don't have measles circulating, because we have herd immunity.
Yeah.
And that herd immunity that we do for each other means that the 6 to 12-month old who isn't vaccinated, they're protected. The child across the street who has common variable immunodeficiency and who can't make the kind of antibodies that they need to, they're protected. Okay. It means that we do for each other. And somehow we've lost that in this 21st, late 20th, 21st century environment. I know that even when I was getting vaccinated, I was revaccinated against measles several times in my life. And I somehow in the 70s, when I was old enough by then to remember someone saying, well, you might have had the measles vaccine in the past, but we're going to give you it again because we need to make sure that those around you are also protected from you spreading measles. And you know what? That was okay. It's a good thing. So I think we have to just turn this around and realize that by getting vaccinated, we're protecting ourselves. But in the case of things like measles, we're also helping protect our neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, on the measles topic, I think a lot of the nation is watching what's happening, and I guess maybe even hoping that maybe we are turning it around. Can you tell us about the status of measles in Texas? What you're watching? What are you watching for? How much measles is out there? You know, we've seen two children deaths, and we had an adult who died in neighboring New Mexico. What's the status right now as you see it with measles?
So, what I see with measles right now is an outbreak that continues to spread, that continues to be highly concerning. I do not consider it leveling off. Um, we just moments ago, I checked, and the April 10th numbers are out. We now have 712 confirmed cases of measles in the United States. Now, remember, that is a massive underestimate of the actual number of individuals who are infected with measles. We estimate that probably 3 to 7 times as many kids actually have been infected and have measles. It's just that that's what's been confirmed to CDC.
Wait, so
These
how
now,
many? So that I think people need to know. What do you mean by that? 6 to 7 times. Say that in
so what I mean is that although CDC doctors have reported to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention cases that have been confirmed to be measles, 712, it means that there are other doctors who may have seen measles but have not reported it, or parents who had their kids at home, the kids had measles and haven't brought them to a doctor.
Yes. So how
Uh,
many? How many measles cases are potentially out there?
Well, you can back calculate because we've now had 3 deaths in the United States, 2 in children and 1 in an older person. I would estimate that probably it's roughly about 3,000 cases. And what's
Wait, you
making me
think
can I
there may
can,
be up to 3,000 measles cases in this country, Doc?
or 3,000 kids or adults have had measles. I'm saying it's possible. The range could be from 1,500 up to even more than 3,000. But ask me, challenge me a little bit. Why do I say that? It's
Well,
because we
yeah.
now have measles in 25 jurisdictions. New states are lighting up continually. There are now 7 states. We're up to 7 states that have at least 3 cases of measles in them. Texas is now well over 500 cases.
I mean, is
Um,
it at a point where we can't count anymore? Like, because measles is so contagious, right? One person can give it to 12. If you're telling me
well,
25 jurisdictions and now we have 50, and
I think I'm going to say the following, and it's a prediction. If we don't act decisively to help people understand how important getting vaccinated against measles is in the very near future, I think just as the state of Texas Department of Health has said, we may not be able to get this under control uh, before the end of this year. We may have more children die, and we may lose our measles elimination status, which would be really a sad thing because we accomplished that in 2000. And from 2000 to 2019, we did pretty well. 2019, we had an outbreak in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, that eventually was brought under control by a robust public health response led by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and by the New York State folks involved in public health. But I don't see that right now here in the United States, so I'm concerned.
Let me ask you something,
Mhm.
Doc. So, look, it's one of the things that we hear from folks who mistrust, again, public health science right now, um, is they feel like there's this overemphasis on infectious disease and an underemphasis on chronic disease. That 8 out of the 10 biggest killers in this country are chronic health issues. And, you heard Robert F. Kennedy in that cabinet meeting say he is urging the press to report about diabetes cases with the same sort of interest and zeal as they report measles cases, that every child who gets a pre-diabetes diagnosis should also get a headline. And I wonder what you say to that. And look, as a mother, as somebody who has had a parent die of cancer, I'm very concerned about chronic health in this country. And do you feel like sometimes the same attention that we give to infectious disease isn't given to chronic disease?
Look, we clearly need to concentrate on chronic disease. Don't get me wrong. But just remember something, though. You don't want to go backwards while you're trying to go forwards. What do I mean by that? Vaccines are among the greatest public health benefits that have come in the 20th and 21st century. Okay. They have advanced public health more than anything else, possibly, with the exception of understanding that your drinking water should come from a different place than where you put your sewage. Okay. So let me just ask you, do you want to go, well, we've made so much progress on other things. We got to concentrate on chronic diseases. You know what? We can just put in your drinking water. Dig that well right next to where your septic system is. Because, we don't have to worry about that anymore. No, we need to keep maintaining our separation of septic system and our drinking wells. We need to maintain our ability to use vaccination to the greatest extent possible. Because believe it or not, some vaccines, like even influenza vaccine, help prevent heart attacks in older people. We need to use all of our tools in our toolkit and then extend to chronic diseases. This idea, look over here at chronic diseases, to not doing basic public health measures that lift us up, that to me is actually not what we call progress. That's called regression. It's
Could
look
you
over here.
support could you support the fact that look, we had Marion Nestle, legendary nutritionist, food science expert on our podcast a few weeks ago, and she said, what the Make America Healthy Again movement has done to shine a light on, ultra processed food and bad eating and chronic disease. She says it's a gift. It's great. She doesn't agree with everything they're saying. Could you acknowledge that the MAHA movement has put a light on some really important topics that, quite frankly, the status quo has not been able to gin up the same enthusiasm? One might have said with Michelle Obama back in the day, she really tried. We saw what happened with that. She got a lot of resistance from that form of the Republican Party. But I don't know that I could say that, the FDA and CDC and all these places have really rallied the country around chronic disease the way MAHA's doing. What do you say to that?
I totally am happy that they're rallying around chronic disease. What are they going to do about it? Tell me specific proposals that they're going to do, specific, not just like, oh, we're going to remove red dye. That's not going to make people. How are they going to get people to mobilize and lose weight and be more active, stop smoking, eat healthier? Some of that, by the way, is so foundationally economic because I don't know about you, but I think I understand the reason why a lot of families that are not very well off don't eat a lot of fresh broccoli and fresh asparagus. It's because they're expensive, whereas you can eat a lot of chicken and rice for the same amount of money. That goes a lot further. So there are so many foundational issues here. Give me a specific proposal. We
I
can
think
make a difference on health.
they would say they want to go after the food industry. They want to go after pharmaceutical companies. They want to go after advertisers. And you're absolutely right. I think I'm also looking for those
Right.
specificities. They're
Those
also
are
going after
negative
infinite.
things. Those are negative
Yeah.
things. Why aren't we talking about the positive things? We can do something positive with vaccination. We can protect ourselves. We can keep each other safe. Those are positive things. And that may go to a more foundational issue as well of whatever happened to faith and faith in one another, faith in a higher purpose. I don't disagree. Chronic disease is a big problem in this country, but you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We got to focus on chronic disease, but we got to continue to take care of things that could really, if we don't take care of them, they're going to bring us all harm. And I don't think we need to go back. It's not an either or, it's an and.
Yeah, do you think that what Maha is saying, what RFK is saying, sort of between the lines, is that if you eat better, get exercise, get outside of the sunlight, your body will be stronger, you'll avoid chronic disease, and you'll also avoid, the ravages of infectious disease. Like, are they putting all the chips? Are they starting to put all the chips on health and food and diet and vitamins and exercise? Like, is that what you're seeing here?
And you won't be a burden on the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the idea here perhaps is that we'll have more focus on, I don't think vitamins are going to, if for those who have reasonable nutrition, I'm not sure that vitamins are going to help a whole lot. I think that obviously diet and exercise in general important to think about. They're thinking, yes, you'll be less of a burden to society. Um, but again, what are we going to do specifically to help people get there? And I'm not talking about people who are well off in this country. I'm talking about what are we going to do for the people who are really in poverty, who want to eat better, perhaps, but can't afford to. What are we going to do for them? Okay. Because for them, sometimes it's we're gonna stretch our dollar the most we can by eating probably less healthily. Um, and unfortunately, unless we transform that somehow, I'm not sure how we're going to address this across the population. And remember, those of us who are in public service or who were in public service, we take an oath to protect the health of everyone in the country. It's not Republicans, not Democrats, not independents. It's everyone. Doesn't matter where they live in a northern state, a southern state, an eastern state, a western state. And so I think we have to find solutions that are scalable for the entire socioeconomic spectrum and not just one end or the other. It's very easy to think about certain things when we're from the upper part of the socioeconomic spectrum. We, though, have to think about solutions that scale across our great nation. Because I am like many of the other people, be they from the Department of Justice who have been let go, um, or even from other agencies, many of us came to public service because we believed in e pluribus unum, out of many one, and that we take care of each other that way.
Peter, I really appreciated that perspective because, I grew up below the economic security line, and I'm very aware of how hard it was to eat healthy. And I would say I'm learning to eat healthy now, but it was not accessible. And that's a key function. And it's not a lack of wanting those things, but a lack of the structure we have for it. And I think another thing that comes up a lot when we talk to people is how pharma plays a role in all of this, in all of these different industries. You had worked in pharma for years. Um, and I wonder what your thoughts are on the influence of pharma in our government science. Is there fair criticism there? Are there things that need to be addressed? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I've often struggled with the issue of how pharma pays back or pays it forward for all of the research that gets done, because there is a fair criticism that a lot of pharma's ultimate advances come out of NIH research dollars, right? All of this basic research endeavor that gets done, and pharma does in some cases pay royalties back, but we serve as a research engine for the globe. And sometimes I think it is true that I think it's a fair criticism. And unfortunately, I'm not the right person. I'm not an economist or someone who's done the analysis to know and be able to speak with real authority. But it does seem sometimes that the American public it's played a disproportionate share for global advances in health. Now, maybe that's a good thing. Some would say maybe that's just what we want to be as a society, but it's a fair criticism. And I'm not in a position to really comment on whether it's right or wrong. It's just I do think it's probably a fact that we have spent, that the NIH is a research engine that has put forth quite a lot towards public health, disproportionate to the U.S. population.
Dr. Marks, this is our final question. You've said, that you want to do your best to continue to advance public health in the future. You've been called, the calm in the storm during some really turbulent crises that our country has faced when it comes to public health. What does it mean to you to not be in that role right now at such an explosive moment for this country? Talk to us a little bit about what's gone through your mind since you've left government.
It's been a very challenging time because I left behind a group of people that is the most committed, and I say this just from the bottom of my heart, they're the most committed to caring for the people of this country and doing the right thing. It's very hard for me that people are levying all sorts of accusations about vaccines that are completely untrue, because there's nothing further from the truth than some of the things I've heard. It's very hard to leave behind those people and seeing them every day and working with them towards the mutual benefit of public health. I also worry that many colleagues have also been let go who were contributed tremendously to public health in an indiscriminate way. I do believe that we probably could have downsized some if it was done thoughtfully, but I'm sad to see what's happened. So for me, it's a sense of loss. It's a sense of sadness that I won't be contributing to the current public endeavor. But as a physician who's learned resilience over time, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to hopefully give back some by being freed now to speak my mind about what's important. So that's one piece. And I will find a way to contribute now. And it may be I will do something essentially just to pay the bills for a period and then hopefully get back into public service when things are more conducive. But for now, I want to do whatever I can. And I just leave this, which is I think where we started off today was a very good question. People have a lot of questions about vaccines. There are people who doubt them. I actually really wish I could get to more of the people who are doubting them. I loved doing that during the COVID pandemic because a lot of the questions just have to do with the fact that we just don't speak people's language in a simple manner. And I hope people will, if nothing else, if you don't think I've gotten to you otherwise, and you're not excited about taking a vaccine, go speak to your doctor. Go speak to your healthcare professional. If you're religious and you feel like there's some religious reason, go speak to your minister, your priest, your pastor. I do believe in the inherent goodness of the vaccine enterprise for the products that we have had come through the process. As I said, I don't believe that every vaccine is good, but I believe the vaccines that have come through our evaluation process and have been recommended, they save lives and we need to make use of them. So thank you for having me today.
Peter, I want to give you a pitch for something to do in this next phase in your life. I want you to talk to those people. Just keep talking to them because I'm going to tell you right now, Peter, what we have hit upon, even with our little podcast, is people who we're building a relationship with who are now comfortable enough to tell us their concerns. And then we set them up with people who've studied stuff their whole lives and they can have those conversations together. I think there absolutely is a space for you, and we need you to continue to contribute to the public endeavor. You don't just have to do it from the very highest seat at the FDA. If anything, I think you will be even more effective right now, believe it or not. So I just encourage you to please get out there and just talk to people, because I will tell you, when I told folks that you were coming on here and you have questions, I was overwhelmed. No one said anything bad. They were all just really eager to ask somebody with your knowledge questions. Don't let the Twitter sphere dictate how people feel about folks. They really just want to ask questions. So look, I'm just one person out there, but I'll just leave you with that thought. I want to thank you, Dr. Peter Marks, for coming onto our show. It was really eye-opening, and I know a lot of folks just really have been wanting to hear from you. They have heard from you in spaces, but to really hear you in depth like this, I think is a real treat for folks. I'm Brenda Adhikari. He is Tom Johnson. He's Dr. Marks. She is Maggie Bartlett. Thank you for joining us on the special episode of Why Should I Trust You? And we will see you back here next week, same time, same place, every Thursday. Thank you, and goodbye.